He was the bionic hero every kid wanted to be, Steve Austin, the $6 million man, a symbol of strength, fame, and the American dream. She was the golden girl of the 70s, Farrah Fawcett, with a smile that stopped hearts and a presence that defined an era. Together, they weren't just stars, they were a Hollywood fantasy come to life. But behind the flashing cameras and perfect red carpet poses, their love story was unraveling. What looked like the ultimate power couple was quietly falling apart. And now, at 86, Lee Majors is finally ready to reveal the painful truth about what really happened, the choices, the heartbreak, and the moment he lost the woman the world thought he'd never let go. But behind the picture-perfect smiles and magazine spreads, the truth was far more painful than anyone imagined. Their love story, once the envy of Hollywood, quietly crumbled into betrayal, silence, and years of unresolved hurt. Lee Majors never truly forgave her, and now, for the first time, we understand why. Long before they became household names, Lee and Farrah were simply two ambitious dreamers, bright-eyed, hungry, and desperate to make their mark in a brutal industry that chews up even the strongest. Lee, born Harvey Lee Urey in Michigan and raised in the quiet strength of Kentucky, had the rugged charm and unshakable presence casting directors craved. His breakthrough came with the Big Valley, where he held his own beside legends like Barbara Stanwyck, quickly gaining a reputation for his intensity and work ethic. He wasn't just another pretty face, he was a force. Meanwhile, Farrah Fawcett, the dazzling Southern beauty from Texas, was blazing her own trail. Her face, fresh, radiant, unforgettable, was magnetic before she even spoke a line. She had that rare glow, a sun-kissed aura with a spark in her eyes that told the world she was destined for more than just magazine covers. Together, they should have been unstoppable. But fame has a price, and theirs was paid in silence, heartbreak, and a final truth Lee Majors is only now ready to speak. They met in the late 1960s, two rising stars colliding at a Hollywood party, and from the very beginning, the spark between them was undeniable. Lee Majors, already a familiar face on television, was known for his quiet strength and down-to-earth nature. Farrah Fawcett, on the other hand, was just stepping into the spotlight with a vivacious energy and charm that lit up every room. Their personalities couldn't have been more different, he was steady, she was electric, but together, they felt unstoppable. Lee grounded her. Farrah inspired him. It was a love story that seemed written by destiny. In 1973, they sealed their bond in marriage, and for a while, it looked like they were living the perfect Hollywood fairy tale. Lee had just landed his career-defining role as Colonel Steve Austin in The $6 Million Man. The series exploded in popularity, making him a household name and plastering his face on action figures, lunchboxes, and posters from coast to coast. At the same time, Farrah's career was heating up. Her modeling gigs turned into national ad campaigns, and her natural charisma was drawing serious attention from casting directors. As her star began to rise, Lee publicly praised her at every turn, her talent, her beauty, her spirit. He called her the love of his life. But behind the scenes, the pressure of fame, distance, and ambition was quietly beginning to pull them apart. They were golden to the outside world. Magazine covers, famous gatherings, and red carpet events. They appeared to be a match made in heaven. However, the cracks that were developing just below the surface were invisible to the general population. Seldom did their schedules coincide. Lee was putting in a lot of overtime on his TV. Farrah was establishing her own profession, networking, and going to auditions. They were gradually being torn apart by the very prominence they had strived so hard to attain. Lee attempted to hang on, though. He had faith in their union. He had faith in her. However, people are changed by fame. Sometimes they change in ways that make them unrecognizable to the person who knew them best, although not always for the worse. Additionally, Farrah's star was poised to soar beyond everyone's expectations. There were going to be stresses on their picture-perfect marriage that no one could have predicted from the outside. Farrah Fawcett did not become famous overnight. Few people ever achieved the amount of fame that she did. Everything changed in an instant when she joined the Charlie's Angels ensemble in 1976. The program quickly became a cultural phenomenon. Farrah, however, evolved into more than simply another TV actress. She turned into the face of the time, representing glitz, self-reliance, and carefree beauty. 1,000 teenage crushes were sparked by this poster. More than 12 million copies were sold of Farrah's smiling, wind-blown hair in the red one-piece bikini. That picture turned into one of the 20th century's most recognizable images. All of a sudden, she was everywhere. Advertisements for products, billboards, magazine covers, and talk programs. Farrah was more than just well-liked. She could not be avoided. Even though she was loved by millions, her quick ascent to prominence put a great deal of stress on the already strained marriage. At this point, Farrah was being tugged in all directions. Her calendar is full of stylists and publicists, producers pitching jobs, and corporations vying for her endorsements. Her husband, Lee Major, frequently found himself waiting on the sidelines while her time became a luxury. The $6 million guy had made Lee a household name, and he was accustomed to the hard hours on set and the sacrifices that come with being a TV star. Even he, however, was unprepared for the chaos that Farrah's celebrity brought into their house. Sweet, grounded, and close to her Texas origins, the lady he had married was evolving into something else. Not harsher or colder, simply aloof and engrossed in the fame machine. Lee requested that the show's producers change her filming schedule so that they could have dinner together a few nights a week, according to reports that have since been verified by a number of people. The request was straightforward: the husband wanted to spend more time with his wife. However, Farrah allegedly said no. She didn't want her spouse to think she was reliant on him. Even if it was admirable, her intense independence simply served to deepen their emotional distance from one another. In a later interview, Lee revealed that at the height of Farrah's fame, he occasionally saw her just twice a week. Those times weren't always spent together, but rather were merely snatches of their once close relationship that were cut down to calendar spaces between promotional events and picture shoots. Happenings. No amount of patience or love seemed to be able to stop the distance from increasing. The significance of the celebrity was more painful than the actual recognition. Farrah's ascent means more than just praise from the general public. It signified a change in connection, values, and priorities. Now, the lady who had depended on him for support was bearing an empire by herself. They also ceased using the same emotional language at some point. Lee has always supported conventional wisdom. He grew up believing that marriage was a holy, lifelong relationship. In public view, however, Farrah was reinventing her identity. Furthermore, slowing down was not an option. She had no intention of harming him. However, there are instances when success has unintended consequences, and their relationship was among the first to suffer. And just when it seemed impossible for tension to increase, something occurred that would shatter what remained. And that happened in front of everyone on the planet. It was impossible to overlook the emotional distance between Farrah Fawcett and Lee Major by the late 1970s. Long periods of separation, professional demands, and celebrity had buried the love that had once united them. In reality, they were leading different lives, even though they were still legally married. Two stars in separate galaxies' orbits. Farrah had a full schedule of appearances, branding partnerships, and TV shoots. As he saw his personal life fade away, Lee continued to film The $6 Million Man, bearing the burden of his own career. He allegedly made repeated attempts to save what was left, contacting people, scheduling time, and even enlisting friends to assist them get back in touch. However, Farrah had already started to move on, possibly without realizing it. Another man, and not just any man, delivered the decisive blow. Lee was familiar with Ryan O'Neal. He was a peer, a fellow actor, and once a reliable friend. Their paths had frequently crossed, and they were both well-known figures in the field. Therefore, Lee experienced instant and intense grief when he saw tabloid images of Ryan and Farrah smiling and holding hands at events. The affair between Farrah and Ryan was not subtle, it made headlines. At the time their romance was made public, she and Lee were still legally married. It was all over. Magazine advertising, late-night TV gags, and unending conjecture. It appeared to be a juicy Hollywood scandal to the outside world. Lee, however, saw it as something very else. It was the most profound betrayal he had ever encountered. Lee's friends said he was taken by surprise. He didn't receive a call. There was no warning given to him. Through glitzy images and dramatic headlines, he and the rest of America learned. Additionally, he had accepted the man she was with into his life. Perhaps more than anything else, that aspect rendered it inexcusable. It has even been suggested by some insiders that Farrah and Ryan started dating when they were still trying to patch up their marriage. However, the exact time frame is yet unknown. It is evident that Lee felt degraded, not just as a spouse, but also as a man who had created a life with someone who now appeared to be changing their history with someone else. For her part, Farrah never denied the connection. The media swiftly portrayed her and Ryan as the newest Hollywood romance after they were spotted together everywhere. However, there was always a hint of uneasiness, an implicit knowledge that something holy had been violated. Lee never discussed it in public. He never gave names. He never struck out. His quiet, however, was deafening. He pulled away. He no longer accompanied her to events. He finally stopped discussing Farrah at all and stopped doing interviews that mentioned personal issues. It appeared to the outside world that he had moved on. Those closest to him, however, were aware of this. He had lost more than simply his wife. He had lost his faith in the meaning of their relationship, his privacy, and his trust. Furthermore, forgiveness was no longer an option because Ryan O'Neal's face was now permanently linked to the dissolution of his marriage. However, instead of facing the commotion, Lee Major took an unexpected action. He vanished entirely from her universe. Lee Major committed a gravely unholy act after the publicity had subsided and the shock value had faded. He said nothing. He refused to back down in a place where everyone seemed to finally give their version of events. There were no interviews, confessions from memoirs, or sly press jabs, just stillness. Lee had already emotionally distanced himself by the time the divorce was finalized in 1982, almost 9 years after their wedding. He threw himself into his career, landing parts in TV shows and films that kept him occupied but never quite brought back the passion of his $6 Million Man days. He starred in The Fall Guy, a multi-season program that maintained his reputation. However, friends claim that he was never really the same behind the scenes. In contrast, Farrah embraced the limelight. She and Ryan O'Neal remained together. It was, Rocky thought. They split up. They made up. They quarreled. They chuckled. And it was all documented in tabloid newspapers. Her whole emotional life seems to have been made public. A far cry from the man she had abandoned. Most strikingly, Lee was completely absent from her story. He was absent at Charlie's Angels reunions. He was never seen close to her when she was in public. Avoidance was not motivated by resentment. It was more akin to a man shielding himself from resentment. Seldom did interviewers dare mention Farrah's name, but when they did, Lee would typically respond politely and continue. At one point, he casually mentioned that he didn't watch Charlie's Angels when it came out. Why? He stated it was simply too painful. Knowing how much had been lost and seeing her on film, larger than life, was more than he could take. The fact that Lee never made an effort to correct the record was possibly the most significant indication of all. He never played the victim, criticized Ryan, or placed the responsibility on Farrah. Rather, he decided to completely vanish from the narrative. He seems to have determined that the only way to maintain control after she left was to disappear from her public life. Friends claimed in private that the wound was still there. Yes, he dated, but it didn't seem like anyone could take Farrah's place. He remained single for almost 20 years, concentrating on his career and hiding his personal life. He was frequently described as pleasant but aloof, with a guardedness that had never been there before. Farrah, meanwhile, turned into nevertheless Farrah, loved, bold, and constantly within the headlines, although no longer constantly for the proper reasons. Her profession had ups and downs, and her relationship with Ryan changed into something but easy. But she remained a public parent, person who wore her emotional scars out loud. The comparison among them changed into stark. She shared her life with the world, regardless of how messy. He closed the door and threw away the key. And while it seemed like their stories had split for top, something surprising passed off years later. An possibility arose, quiet, non-public, and stale, the document, that would have modified the whole lot among them. However, what Lee did next best showed what many had long suspected. Some heartbreaks by no means absolutely fade, and a few silences are louder than words. Years exceeded. The media moved on, and so did the careers of each Lee Majors and Farrah Tapp. But backstage, something unexpected almost befell. A private reunion that would have rewritten their story. It changed into the early 2000s and Farrah had entered a quieter section of her lifestyles. Her relationship with Ryan O'Neal had cooled and he or she became focusing more on her artwork, charity paintings, and small acting projects. Lee, too, had mellowed with time. He changed into no longer the intense motion famous person of the 1970s, but a reputable actor with many years of experience in the back of him. That turned into when a mutual pal reportedly approached them both separately approximately the possibility of reconnecting. Consistent with assets near the couple, the inspiration became simple. Not a public spectacle, now not a reunion for cameras, but just a quiet meeting, a danger to talk, perhaps even laugh, and finally clear the air after so many years of silence. In the beginning, it seemed like each parties were open to the concept. Farrah, it became said, had softened toward the concept of seeing Lee again. She had as soon as cherished him deeply, and time had mellowed most of the old emotions. Lee, for his part, became more hesitant. He listened. He concept about it. He even admitted privately that part of him ignored the man or woman she used to be. But then he stated no. He was no longer irritated. He changed into now not sour. He just did not want to move back. An excessive amount of had happened. Too much time had exceeded. And some wounds, especially those left unspoken, in no way certainly healed. His silence all those years, had no longer simply been approximately dignity. It were about safety. Seeing her again, even for a moment, supposed reopening a chapter he had worked difficult to shut. Not lengthy after, Farrah turned into identified with cancer. Her condition worsened rapidly, and any opportunity of reunion dwindled. Lee in no way visited. He in no way reached out publicly. To some it appeared cold, however to others it became heartbreak in its quietest form, the sort that in no way reveals the right words. The fact is Lee Primary had already said goodbye. Long before the sector knew Farrah turned into ill, he had already permit her pass. But deep down that door had never surely closed, and what took place subsequent made that heartbreak very last. In 2006, the arena changed into taken aback to analyze that Farrah Tapp were identified with a rare and aggressive shape of cancer. She faced her warfare with vast courage, deciding on to record her experience in an uncooked, deeply non-public video diary that could later air as a documentary. It was her very last act of public vulnerability, stripped of glamour, unfiltered by reputation. Hundreds of thousands watched, many cried, or even greater in demand the electricity she confirmed inside the face of devastating odds. But one individual remained relatively silent via it all. Lee Majors. While tributes poured in and the clicking revisited her legacy, Lee stayed out of the verbal exchange. He did no longer comment. He did now not seem. He did not attend her public events or non-public fundraisers. It became not due to the fact he did not care. Pretty the other. In line with those near him, Lee changed into aware of Farrah's circumstance from the very beginning, and it deeply affected him. Friends say he observed her health updates quietly, choosing to grieve from a distance. There was no animosity left, simply sorrow. However, Lee had made peace with the idea that their bankruptcy had ended long in the past. Re-entering that space, whilst a gesture of consolation, becomes something he just could not bring himself to do. Whether or not it was fear, guilt, or self-upkeep, no one can say for certain. But he stayed away. When Farrah exceeded away in June of 2009, Lee launched a unmarried, carefully worded assertion. She fought a brilliant struggle towards a horrible disease. She become an angel on the planet, and now she is an angel all the time. It become quick, polite, respectful, however missing the warmth that once described their love tale. He did now not attend her funeral. A few say he could not face it. Others consider he had already mourned her long before she was gone. The reality can be somewhere in among. What is apparent is that Lee Primary, the man who as soon as might have done anything for Farrah, selected as an alternative to keep in mind her from afar. However, even in that distance, his silence spoke volumes, and plenty of believe he carried quiet remorse till the very end. Time has a way of rewriting stories. These days, while humans bear in mind Lee Principal and Farrah Fawcett, it is regularly via the lens of nostalgia, a lovely couple from a golden era stuck inside the spotlight of reputation and teens. Their images nevertheless circulate online, framed in vintage filters, smiling at red carpet activities as if nothing ever went incorrect. But people who followed their journey understand the fact was a ways greater complicated. Lee Majors ultimately moved on. In 2002, he married again, this time to a girl a long way outdoor the Hollywood scene. It changed into a quieter, greater solid bankruptcy, and by using all accounts, one which delivered him peace. But despite a new lifestyles, the shadow of Farrah never completely disappeared. She had been his first great love and his finest heartbreak. Farrah too left in the back of a powerful legacy. No matter the chaos of her personal lifestyles, she fought difficult to be taken seriously as an actress, income's essential approval for dramatic roles later in her profession. And in her final years, she had become a symbol of braveness, facing her illness with honesty and charm. But what remained unfinished turned into the story among them. There has been no final communique, no public reconciliation, no second of peace between the two individuals who had as soon as been everything to each different. And for fans, that thriller lingers. Did Lee ever genuinely forgive her? Did she ever want him to? The solution possibly lies within the silence that followed her passing and the years that came before it. Lee by no means attacked her publicly. He never capitalized on their story. Never tried to reclaim his side of the narrative. As a substitute, he held on to what became left quietly in non-public where no digicam should observe. Because ultimately, the female Lee Majors by no means forgave may also had been the woman he in no way stopped loving.